Welcome to the Asian Americans. I'm your host, Jerry Wan, and welcome to the Asian American Dreamer series brought to you by Toyota. As a proud sponsor of those who dare to dream, Toyota isn't just settling with having them as words on a page. The stories of these Asian Americans need to be seen, heard, and supported. As a title sponsor of this initiative, Toyota is going to ensure that this happens in every way possible. We hope these 10 stories will inspire you to chase your own Asian American dreams.
Part of me says, keep working. The other says, keep dreaming. This is day one of the dream taking over. No more hiding my uniqueness. This is day one of me being 100% me.
Welcome to Dear Asian Americans, the Asian American Dreamer series. Here we are today with Nora Ali, a multi-hyphenate of all sorts of different things. So we'll get to all of that. But primarily, I guess foremost, a friend of mine and a friend of the show. We are joining you here from the Pacific Beach or the Pacific Ocean on a beachside here in Los Angeles. Maybe you can see it in the background. Maybe you won't. But it's a beautiful day and want to take this time to explore your journey into your career that has taken zigs and zags and certainly not done, but I think many look to you, particularly South Asian women, and apply the term, wow, she's doing something that I aspire to be. She's doing something that I didn't know was possible for us. And so this idea of you chasing your own dream and what we're deciding to call the Asian American dream, which is a subset of what we've been taught as the overall American dream, but very different for us, obviously, given our family backgrounds, our family expectations, cultural values, and just the career paths that many of us were expected to take. Yeah. And so give us a brief history or story of what you do now and what you initially did coming out of school and sort of how we can bridge those two things together.
Let's start from the beginning.
Yep.
I studied finance and statistics in college. And the default thing to do at the time, at least amongst my peers, was to go work at an investment bank. So I went to go work at Goldman, and that was kind of what was expected of me, having been in the sort of business and economics world as far as my studies. And Goldman Sachs is a name that all my relatives knew. It's like you tell them that you work at Goldman Sachs, the conversation can kind of end there. Like, right. Okay, I understand, and you move on. And then after a few years there, I decided that I wanted to go try working for a startup, which at that time was starting to become the cool thing to do. And it was called Jet.com, an e-commerce company. It was sub 100 people, super early stage. I joined it. It was amazing. Got acquired by Walmart for $3.5 billion, which was exciting to see. And making that transition was something that I had to work myself up to explaining to my parents. You're leaving the secure job at Goldman to go work at this random tiny e-commerce company. And then when it gets acquired for $3.5 billion, they're like, oh, okay, okay, we get it. It's like a real company. And then I switched over to working at Cheddar as a news anchor, covering tech and business and entertainment and politics, a little bit of everything. And now currently I am the co-founder of a production company, and we're creating content that touches on business, entrepreneurship, innovation, etc., but really across genres. And I was lucky enough to have a couple of angel investors support me in that journey and actually ask me to do that. So I'm building in the media business, which you and I both know is very difficult.
It is, and not only are you building yourself this Asian American dream or your own Nora dream, you're doing the part of sharing other people's stories. So not your main job, but you do host a podcast for the Morning Brew Network called Business Casual, where I've been fortunate to be a guest on it. But you've really taken the opportunity to use your platform and your voice to bring on stories of immigrants, of other folks of color, to say, how are you doing business differently? Because I think, again, the reason why we're calling this the Asian American dream is that it is very much like the American dream that we were taught to think of, but it's just a little different. And it's not that it's bad or it's worse, it's just, it's different because we have, as you mentioned, I mean, we still have to think about what our parents are going to think. And we're grown-ass people, right? So we're grown people, but even, thinking about what is mom going to think? What is her extended network going to think? And I wonder, when did that quiet down for you? Because you did mention too, and I find myself and my friends doing the same thing. It only became acceptable or even applauded when there was objective success.
Right.
So Jet.com was cool once it was sold, right? The thing that I was doing was fine once I got to, have deals or I got invited to certain places. And so
Exactly.
the goal is through these conversations to eliminate that expectation,
Yeah.
to be able to support and to applaud our friends doing anything they want.
Totally.
But for you, how was that journey? And do you still feel like what you're doing now,
Yeah.
that you're still thinking about, oh, what is Auntie XYZ going to think?
It's funny you should say that, because I think I had considered my jobs in terms of how easily my parents could explain to their extended family what it is that I do. So going to work for this, at the time, random startup, it was a little bit difficult for them to exactly explain what it was that I was doing. So that was a consideration for me. And then going to anchor TV, that was very random. It wasn't anywhere in my career trajectory necessarily, but I found validation in that because they could literally put me on TV and tell my other relatives, you tune into this channel, you type in cheddar.com, you'll see Nora on TV.
Right.
So it's the ease with which you can explain what it is that I do that used to drive me. But now, building a production company without anything that's on air yet, it's you get asked by your relatives, oh, what channel can I tune into to see what you're working on? I'm like, not yet, it takes time and all of that. So it's been a journey for me to try to let go of needing that external validation and affirmation from my relatives. And honestly, something that I talked to my therapist about too is I have never been more confident in the path that I'm in career-wise. And that's because I know I've always wanted to build something from scratch. I've kind of known that I wanted to end up in the world of media and entertainment. And even though my relatives can't maybe exactly explain to others what it is I do, I've finally gotten to that point of comfort that, it's not about what others think and their ease of explaining what I do. It's really about how I'm enjoying every day.
How does that impact you? Because I think we talk about wanting to be reputable or be relatable to our family, but I think a part of what we sometimes judge ourselves by too is that even though we like to think that brands don't matter, that logos on a resume don't matter, they still do. And you and I have been the beneficiaries of having globally recognized logos on our resumes that have afforded us opportunities that objectively other friends with similar talents without that don't. And so I think we still live in a world where we'd like to, venture off and do, a podcast that nobody's heard of.
Yeah.
But when we get to work on a cool deal like this with Toyota, then it gives us validation, not only to the world, but for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I think what is helpful to younger generations now is knowing that it is the norm to have a circuitous path and to start your own company that might not get any traction for many, many years, to go work for a tiny startup that has no name recognition whatsoever. I think when I had first started my career, it was still abnormal to kind of have a new job every couple of years. Now it's totally normal.
Right.
And having a gap in your resume is normal, which I think our generation, that is accepted. But it is still difficult to explain to your parents and your older relatives, I'm actually maybe don't have a job right now. Right. I'm just building towards something. I don't have funding, right? Whatever the story might be, but it doesn't matter because they'll see that you're happy. It sounds so cliched, but I think just the idea of talking about mental health and therapy amongst immigrant families is becoming a little bit more normal now.
Yeah.
And when I first started to make this about therapy, but I think it's such an important part of my journey as a child of immigrants. When I first started therapy, my mom thought, it's only for people who are messed up, right?
Sure.
And it's not necessarily trying to be proactive about your own mental health. But now, and I'll be home in Minnesota visiting. I'm like, oh, Mom, I have to go, pop into therapy. She's like, great. Instead of asking me, why are you in therapy?
Right.
So it's really making progress in terms of our elders understanding that our happiness is the most important thing and not the labels that we have on our resumes.
And I think us in this middle generation have maybe we can call it a burden, but I think this great opportunity and gift to sort of do so much so that the next generation of young folks or even our children after us have it that much easier because so much has changed. The technology has changed so much in our lifetime.
Yeah.
but also this identity of what it means to be Asian in this country.
Yeah.
Many of it, or much of it, for really unfortunate reasons of us being in the spotlight for not such great things, a lot of difficult conversations. But I think it has forced our parents and that generation to reevaluate what could come or what should come from the sacrifices that they made.
100%.
And so, and it sounds like, and obviously having been your friend and seeing you engage with your family, you have very open-minded and loving parents who are very supportive. And then unfortunately, not everybody has that. And
Right.
I want to ask you, what things that you've experienced with your parents, or, as you mentioned, you not only openly talk about therapy, but with your parents or with your mother as well. How can others really sort of bridge that gap? Because I think we need to either heal or to talk about how we can redefine that dream.
Yeah.
Because we often have been told that because our parents made the sacrifice, that they have the right to dictate what we do with that sacrifice. And that's just not fair. And our parents would say, hey, I did all these things for you. Why can't you just
Sure.
go to law school?
Right.
Why can't you just marry the person that I
Yeah.
want you to marry?
Oh, that's a whole other thing. We won't get into that. No, it's really transformed for me over time. And I think the most important thing I've learned is to include my parents in my decisions and the conversations. Because when I switched from Goldman to Jet.com, I didn't tell them I was interviewing. I didn't tell them about it at all until I had the offer. And I said, by the way, you parents, I made a big decision, and I gave them all my XYZ reasons. They had questions for me. They were ultimately very happy for me. But in this latest career transition and starting this company, when my investors had come to me to sort of ask me to start this company, the first people I called were my parents. Right? Because I understood, and I knew that they would understand that this is such a big decision. They know it's the path that I want to be on, and they loved being included in all of the decisions around it. So I think even if you're afraid to tell your parents that you're making a career switch or you're quitting your job to start something, just talk to them. They're happy to be included and happy to know that you trust them and that you are seeking out their support and guidance. I think that's super important.
And I think it's really important to also understand for ourselves that they're operating from a complete different perspective, a different knowledge base and exposure base than we are.
Yeah.
I think sometimes I have to remind myself constantly that my parents grew up in Korea in the 60s and 70s. So they've had to both change generationally, which all parents do, but also change a continental shift in culture.
Yeah.
That is there really one way to define American? Of course not. That's why we're here. But to think about how all of that means, we're so used to Googling something or asking a group text or all of these things, right?
Right.
And they didn't have that.
Yeah.
And so our parents are operating the best way that they know, but not really knowing what this world is. And
Right.
And that, I think, is the gift and the burden that we have to explain it to them too, not in a way that shames them, but to say, hey, like, I think that this is important. I've said this on the show plenty. For like the first year and a half of me doing this, I don't think my parents knew what I did. And they didn't really understand what the revenue model or what the business model was.
Right.
And it wasn't until, I think for my dad at least, I got the invite to the White House. They're like, oh, wow. It makes sense, right? And so how do we do that, right? And again, I want this to be accessible. I want people to see what you do and what other friends do to chase their own dream without having to feel like they can be a part of a billion-dollar exit at a startup.
Right.
Or to have household names as your investors or to get invited to the White House.
Yeah.
To feel that, because not everybody has that, nor should they have that as a qualifier to their dream.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned about just how different it was for our parents to even find their careers, because I was talking to my mom about this pretty recently, and they were in Bangladesh. They came to the US to go to grad school in Kentucky, of all places. In order to find their first job, it's like you were literally opening up a phone book and making phone calls to chemistry departments, hoping that there's an opening, right? Like, how nuts is that when we have LinkedIn and we have all these different ways to find jobs? I think what has sort of helped me think about the way that my parents think about finding a new career differently is highlighting who my networks are, who these people, like the fact that I'm coming here to see you. And my mom was so excited. She's like, oh, you're going to be on a podcast? I thought you would just host podcasts. Yeah, Mom, I'm on podcasts sometimes. So explaining that you have this sort of community of support and you're not doing it by yourself. Because starting a company, as you know, can be very lonely. But emphasizing to your parents that I'm in this whole new world and there's a lot of support around it and people accept failures and that's part of the whole experience. Just, again, including them in the conversations versus just waiting for the milestones and just waiting for the successes to call them up. I still struggle with that. You know, they ask me for updates on my company and I don't like to talk about it as much unless I have this big win that I can share with them. But I'm starting to just be a little bit more communicative and that's really helped both sides of it.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's going back to a little bit of empathy for our parents, understanding how they were taught.
Yeah.
Because it was a hell of a lot more linear than the way we're thinking about life. And it's important for us not to shame them saying you don't know anything, but help them understand what we're doing in the context that makes sense to them. So when somebody looks at your resume, at the beginning they'll see Goldman Sachs, and today they'll see founder of a media company that is working on a whole lot of things that we can't talk about yet. And again, that gap is really hard, especially if somebody's listening who is in a job such as investment banking or consulting that just seems so linear in the micro, and it doesn't really make sense for that person, for her or him, to think about how do I get to do what Nora does.
Yeah.
Talk to us about advice for that person, because you would not have gone from there to here without, some of the detours or some of the zigzags that we've talked about. Because in between that, you start up TV personality, podcast person, all these things. What's the advice for that person who doesn't know how to fill in whatever's between A and Z?
Yeah, for me, I think the key was not thinking too long term, because I was at Goldman. I realized that this wasn't what I wanted my entire career path to be. So I thought, what is a risk I can take that still taps into expertise that I've built at Goldman? Every career choice I've made seems kind of random and zigzaggy, but it's kind of like a pyramid. It's all really built off of the foundation of each previous job I've had. So in applying to startups, the way that I pitched myself in these rooms was as a generalist, because early stage startups want to hire people oftentimes who can literally do any job that you give them. And I had a background in statistics, so I was like, I can be a data person, I can be a marketing person, I'm very good at synthesizing a lot of information, because that's kind of what I was doing at Goldman as a research analyst. And I took calculated risks. And then going from Jet.com to anchoring at Cheddar, there were extracurricular activities I had done growing up. I'm a pianist and a violinist, so I performed on stages all the time. I would MC fundraisers and was very comfortable being on a mic and being on stage. And that's how I packaged myself as I was applying to be a business anchor. A, I have performance experience, and B, I've worked in a bank and I've worked at a startup. This is the topics that you cover, so I have actual industry expertise. And then transitioning from that into building my own company, I worked at an early stage startup. I've built products from scratch, and I can apply that knowledge to building a company from scratch. So it really is about thinking what your skill sets are, but what you enjoy doing the most, and finding ways to really package yourself in the interview room. And also cold emailing, cold messaging people on LinkedIn, on email, DMs, whatever. That's how I got my foot in the door at Cheddar. That was probably the biggest pivot, was from Jet to Cheddar. And I had just cold LinkedIn'd some talent agents, and one of them got back to me and introduced me to the open role at Cheddar. So yeah, keeping your networks really wide, even if you feel like you have nothing to offer them, some people, out of the goodness of their hearts, will get back to you and give you a shot. And I owe a lot of people that.
And you and I met in a LinkedIn audio events room because I said, holy crap, this is somebody I want to get to know. And you happen to be in LA for another conference, I think a couple weeks after that. And so what's your take on, what's the advice on growing networks? And again, to me, building a network is like planting a garden. You don't plant an apple tree if you want to eat an apple tomorrow.
Yeah.
You need to have planted that long time ago, not knowing when you're going to want the apple.
Definitely.
And so, tell us maybe, rephrase this, but we don't dream by ourselves. Yes. Or I guess we can dream by ourselves, but the execution of the dream or the manifestation of the dream doesn't happen in a vacuum alone. And so, how do you view building networks and building a team of people that may help you, may not help you? Because a lot of these opportunities have opened up because of people, not because of, circumstances.
Exactly. And my latest opportunity building this company came from a previous boss that I had in totally different industry. So I love your planting seed analogy, because I used to think that if I reached out to someone to be a mentor, be in my network, I felt like my ask had to be very specific. Whether it was for a 15-minute phone call or here's 3 questions I would love you to, it doesn't have to be specific. I love, and I'm kind of in the middle, right? I seek out mentors, but people now seek me out as a mentor myself. I love when I just get a message from someone who says, love your work on the Business Casual podcast. I'm doing XYZ with my life, really inspired by your career. Would just love to stay in touch. They're not asking me even for a meeting. They're not asking for anything. And then I'll see an open job for some host or in the journalism space, and I'll remember, this young person was trying to pivot into media. Let me connect. It comes to fruition later on. It doesn't have to be a very calculated and intentional ask in that moment. So I've tried to do that more as well, whether it's reaching out to new people or even sending random thank yous to people who have impacted my career. Just like, hey, I've been thinking about you and really couldn't have made this career leap without you. Just wanted to say hi, that's it. And you don't have a particular ask. So I think, remember that people feel good when they feel like they've helped you, and they'll continue to sort of pay it forward. So I think that's really helped me.
Yeah, I think, sometimes we live in this era where everything is about efficiency and everything is about a life hack.
Transactional.
Right. And so, I want to encourage people who are listening or watching to think about life as a forever game, and that you never know when you're going to need help or want help. Because I think a lot of what we see even on LinkedIn is like, follow this script to get a response.
Right.
And it just, and as a recipient of many of these, templates or copy and paste jobs, as I'm sure you have, it's just, I want to coach these young people to say, hey, look, like, I completely understand why you think this is the right way to do it, but there's a complete different way, in my mind, a much more fruitful and ROI positive way to build relationships and to give first and offer help first, instead of saying, hey, can you help me with this one very specific thing that I want to do right now?
It'll also get people to respond to you if you're not asking for something specific in the moment. If someone sends me a nice note and says, we'd love to stay in touch, I'm way more likely to respond and be like, oh, so great to meet you. Yes, let's stay in touch. Because if you ask me for a 30-minute phone call, I have to either find a reason why I can't, or I have to look at my calendar and figure out when that 30-minute phone call is. So it's just nice to create these organic relationships, to your point, where you don't know when it's going to pay off. It might not even ever pay off. But the more people you know, the more chance you have of something paying off.
In the aggregate, it will.
Exactly.
Don't ever ask somebody to pick your brain. That's
easy
way.
Dislike that.
Easy way to not get a response from somebody.
I don't want my brain picked.
You've done some great things, and you've chased your own Asian American dream. How do we allow more people to do what you do? How do we make it more possible and more probable for the next person to have it easier for them to chase their own dream than maybe you and I have had it?
This is a very big pillar and value that I have in the company that I'm building, is every project we take on, everything we do has to have some lens of helping to elevate historically excluded people. Whether it's the production companies we partner with, or it's the people whose stories we tell, or it's the showrunners that we pick to actually create these shows. I want to be that place that people know they can go to if they don't have that linear path. They don't have that they don't know exactly how to navigate the world of, in my case, entertainment, which as we know is historically it's still pretty archaic. You know, there's certain kinds of people that are still very much in charge. So I think for those of us who have a platform and a position of power like this, is be extra intentional about choosing to help people and work with people and elevate people who wouldn't have the access without us.
I think that's beautiful. And, you know, the work that you do that I think makes this conversation a little bit more, you know, hits home for me. Obviously, we do similar work in the podcast and sort of the media space, but you're out there. People see you, people hear you. And, you know, even on, again, the show that you host, it's not important. It is important that you are the host, but it is more important to me and for a lot of people that you have used that privilege and position to invite other people onto the show who, frankly, if you weren't the host, I don't know if I would have ever gotten an invite. and you know, again, that's not a reflection on anything else, but you've been intentional in trying to make space for that. And, you know, it is honorable because we talk about representation. It's proper representation. And it is having that person in that role that will use their power to make something happen.
And it's hard because you have to go against what's easiest. And just using the example of Morning Brew and Business Casual, there's a certain demographic. It's maybe not the most diverse demo of audiences that they have, and they're obviously working towards it, but having on guests that are from historically excluded backgrounds might not show value in the numbers right away, right? It takes time to build new audiences, bring in people who otherwise wouldn't be paying attention to Business Casual. And you have to work against momentum oftentimes. And people will tell you it's not working because the numbers aren't showing. And you just have to be patient and get ready for people to disagree with you. And that's been one of the challenges for me, is even in pitching shows to networks and streamers, to buyers for my production company, people will say, oh, you know, this is not like mainstream enough. This is very specific. Like I pitched a show, we chatted about this a little bit, about Asian American founders specifically. And one of the first pieces of feedback I got was, you know, the audience is just not big enough for this. There just aren't enough people who care. I'm like, it doesn't have to be everybody, but also, do you know how large the population is of Asian people?
We're half the world
on this planet.
Don't forget.
But people have these ways that they've been thinking for decades. You just gotta be patient and try to change it. One person at a time.
And thanks for making time. I know it's not an easy. You flew in from New York just for this, so I appreciate you doing that.
Like I've said before, I'll fly anywhere for you, Jerry.
You can find all things Nora at noraali.com, at Nora Ali on Instagram. You can check out the Business Casual podcast on the Morning Brew Network. And if all goes as planned, you'll see a lot more of our work on your TV, on your phone, on your streaming, whatever you do, wherever you do it. Really, thank you for primarily doing what you do, because I think you are an inspiration to so many. The way that you do things is honorable and inspirational, specifically to me and the people that I get to share your story with. And so it means a lot. Best of luck in all that you do. And we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you, Jerry. And thank you for everything that you do. One of the biggest champions of this community. Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching this episode of the Asian American Dreamer series on Dear Asian Americans. We hope that this story and the other ones that we share in our series have inspired you to identify and chase your own Asian American dream. And Toyota will be along with you all the way to make sure that happens. We want to thank Toyota for sponsoring our series. And to learn more about the great work that they're doing in our community, visit toyotausa.com. Thanks for watching. I'm Jerry Wan, your host of Dear Asian Americans, wishing you health, safety, and happiness.